So today we're diving into one of the most ambitious political experiments in all of history, the attempt to basically outlaw major wars in Europe. And you know what? For almost 100 years, from 1815 all the way to 1914, they kind of pulled it off. The great powers managed to avoid a massive continent-wide war. But this long peace, it didn't happen by accident. Oh no, it was a system, carefully designed and built. A system that worked for a century and then failed in the most spectacular way possible. Let's get into how it was built and why maybe it was doomed from the very start.
And I want to start with this quote because, really, the story we're telling today is all about Europe's most powerful rulers trying to impose their own version of the truth on everyone else. It was an attempt to write a future for Europe that just erased all those dangerous new ideas about revolution and completely rewrote the rules of the game.
And this was the massive million-dollar question they were all facing. I mean, think about it. After 2 straight decades of non-stop war, thanks to the French Revolution and then Napoleon, Europe was just exhausted. The old world was completely shattered. So how do you possibly put it all back together? And more importantly, how do you make sure it never ever breaks apart like that again?
To really get what they were trying to do, you've got to understand the sheer scale of the mess they were in. We're talking 1815. This wasn't just about rebuilding a few cities, it was about trying to rebuild an entire political reality from the ground up.
See, Napoleon's armies hadn't just conquered land. They had spread these radical, explosive, new ideas everywhere they went. Liberty, equality, nationalism. For the old royal families of Europe who believed they ruled over subjects, not citizens, this was an absolute nightmare. The chaos wasn't just physical, it was ideological. They needed a pretty radical solution to put the genie back in the bottle.
And that solution was hammered out at a huge meeting called the Congress of Vienna. All the winners, Austria, Britain, Prussia, and Russia, they all got together to literally design a new order for Europe. And let's be clear, this was not just another peace treaty. This was a full-on attempt to turn back the clock.
The future of an entire continent was basically in the hands of these 4 incredible characters. You had Prince Metternich of Austria, kind of the host and the brains of the operation. He saw liberalism as a disease, something that could tear his multi-ethnic empire to shreds. Then there was Britain's Lord Castlereagh, a cool-headed pragmatist totally obsessed with making sure no single country could ever get powerful enough to dominate again. You've got Tsar Alexander of Russia, this really strange mix of a religious mystic and a total geopolitical shark. And then, amazingly, there's Talleyrand, representing defeated France, who just masterfully played everyone against each other to make sure his country survived.
Their whole blueprint really boiled down to 3 core principles. First, restoration. Simple enough, put all the kings that Napoleon had kicked out back on their thrones. Second, legitimacy. This was about hammering home the idea that kings rule by the grace of God, not because the people voted for them. And third, and this is the big one, the one that really lasted, the balance of power. This was the real game changer, an attempt to create a system so perfectly weighted that no one country could even think about trying to conquer all the others.
So how did they plan to enforce all this? Well, that's where the Concert of Europe comes in. It was basically an informal agreement that these great powers would act like a kind of board of directors for the continent. Anytime a crisis popped up, they'd get together, talk it out, and act in concert to put out the fire. It was, for all intents and purposes, the world's first real shot at collective security.
And as you can see, this wasn't just some abstract theory. It had very real, on-the-ground consequences. Check out how they contained France. It's literally surrounded by stronger states, like a new Kingdom of the Netherlands and a beefed-up Prussia, which was deliberately given land right on the Rhine River to act as a guardian. Meanwhile, Russia pushes west. Austria gets a ton of influence in Italy and Germany. And Britain? Well, Britain doesn't really want land in Europe. It snaps up strategic naval bases like Malta, securing its trade routes and its path to global domination. Every single move was a calculated piece in this massive continental chess game.
And you know what? For about 30 or 40 years, the system actually worked. There were no big wars between the great powers, but it was a really uneasy peace. It was like a heavy, conservative lid being pushed down on a pot that was absolutely boiling with new ideas and new ambitions.
And you can see the cracks starting to form right away just by looking at the 2 main alliances they set up. On one side, you had the Holy Alliance. This was a super ideological pact between the most conservative kings to just crush revolution wherever it popped up. On the other side, you had the more practical Quadruple Alliance, which even Britain joined. Its only goal was to keep France in check. And this split between meddling in other countries' internal business and just keeping the balance of power, that was the fault line that would eventually tear the whole thing apart.
While the rest of the continent was busy worrying about revolutions, Britain was busy building a global economic empire. And this number, This number right here shows you the absolutely staggering scale of their dominance. At its peak, Britain's merchant navy made up half of the world's entire shipping tonnage. This era of peace was really the era of Pax Britannica, a British peace enforced by the Royal Navy and paid for by the Industrial Revolution.
But here's the thing. No amount of money or ships could permanently stamp out the two powerful ideas that the whole Vienna system was designed to destroy. These were the system's real enemies, and they weren't going away.
First, you had liberalism, the idea that people should have constitutions, individual rights, and governments that are actually accountable to them. This was a direct attack on that whole legitimacy principle of kings ruling by divine right. And then you had the second, even more explosive idea, nationalism. This was the belief that a people, folks who share a language and a culture, like the Italians or the Germans or the Poles, that they all deserve to have their own country. For giant multi-ethnic empires like Austria, which was a jumble of Germans, Hungarians, Slavs, and Italians all under one crown, this idea wasn't just a problem, it was a death sentence.
And in 1848, that pot finally boiled over. Just look at the speed of this. It kicks off in Paris in February, and within weeks, it's like a wildfire of revolutions spreading across the entire continent. Metternich, the guy who literally built this conservative order, is forced to flee Vienna in disguise. Uprisings explode everywhere. Berlin, Italy, Hungary. For a brief, crazy moment, it looked like the entire Vienna system, this dam they had built against change, was about to be completely washed away.
Now, the revolutions of 1848 were, in the end, crushed. The armies of the old order managed to regain control, but the damage was done. The spirit of cooperation, that concert of Europe idea, was shattered. And a new, much more ruthless kind of politics was about to take its place. The final collapse had begun.
The final death blow came with the Crimean War. For the first time in 40 years, the great powers were at each other's throats. Britain and France went to war with Russia, and crucially, Austria betrayed its old ally Russia, siding with the West. That was it. The Holy Alliance was dead, and with it, any shred of trust that held the concert of Europe together.
And this right here shows us exactly what took its place. The old way, the concert of Europe, was based on a shared ideology, being conservative, and a shared goal of keeping the peace. The new way was realpolitik. It's a German word for a brand of ruthless, brutally practical politics, mastered by guys like Otto von Bismarck. It was based purely on power and national interest. Its goal wasn't to preserve the system. Its goal was to use war as just another tool in the toolbox to get what you want, like unifying Germany or Italy.
Which brings us to our final, kind of mind-bending question. The men at Vienna designed a system that successfully prevented a massive continent-wide war for almost a century. That's an incredible achievement. But by suppressing forces like nationalism and liberalism for so long, by keeping that lid pressed down on the boiling pot, they guaranteed that when those forces finally did erupt, they would do so with unbelievable world-shattering violence. The system designed to prevent another Napoleon, in a tragic twist, ended up helping to pave the road straight to 1914 and the First World War.